So this might surprise some of you quite a bit, but I think NASCAR should be commended. I think they absolutely nailed the package at Talladega. I think that was one of the most enjoyable start to finish NASCAR races that I have seen in a very long time. I think it was entertaining. It was not something that was predictable. Uh, I think they hit all the boxes that they were looking for, especially for, I guess we can't call them restrictor plate races anymore because of the tapered spacer, but for a super speedway NASCAR race, a pack race, if you will, I think that was about as good as it could have gotten. Easily the best NASCAR race of the season, and certainly one of the better ones in the Gen 6 era. It was great. And what's funny about this is that of the races this season, this is the first race that actually had a horsepower increase over last season. Last season with the restrictor plates, and in fact at Daytona with the restrictor plates, the engines were putting out about 400 horsepower. With a tapered spacer, they're putting it out about 500. So 100 horsepower increase, and we had one of the best races of the season. Funny how that works. But in terms of the racing quality, I'll give you some of the highlights, some of the things that I felt were particularly good. The leader wasn't a sitting duck. I think a lot of people were worried about potentially it being a total lottery, maybe a wreck fest, people being able to get a little too ambitious. And we did see some of that with Bubba Wallace and a few other drivers just kind of getting caught out by the closing speeds. On the whole, though, we saw the cream still able to rise to the top. And those drivers who are kind of the elite level drivers, the Joey Logano's, the Chase Elliott's, if they got out front, they were able to lead the field. Now, they could be passed. It wasn't like they were impossible to pass like we've seen in some other instances of Talladega and Daytona races. If people lined up and correctly or got a big enough run, they were able to get around cars. And it also worked for cars at the back of the field. I think Kyle Busch really had the best car driver package in this entire race, but he didn't have a whole lot of help. Despite that, if he got shuffled to the back, and he got shuffled to the back quite a bit, he was able to knife his way right back up to the front of the field, no problem. So a lot of the things that we saw at like Atlanta, for example, with this tapered spacer package, a guy like Kyle Larson who had a dominant car at that race, as soon as he was at the back of the pack, he couldn't move forward. He was unable to do so. At this race, it was totally the opposite. In fact, we saw guys like Jeffrey Earnhardt, and by the way, shout out to Jeffrey Earnhardt and Justin Haley. I think those two drivers had pretty fantastic races despite being caught up in accidents later in the race. They were able to come through the field fairly easy, and that underdog thing kind of became a factor at Talladega again, which we haven't really seen a whole lot of in recent years with how dominant it seems like some of the big teams have been. Thinking more about the package itself, it seemed like, unlike previous years, the cars were, while they had more downforce, and by the way, they did look ridiculous with the spoilers the way they were, but honestly, I'm not going to complain about it too much because it worked. With all that downforce, you saw the track change. It actually, in fact, this whole race felt very much like a 2001 plate race. It really did. Really, really did. And in fact, probably the entire Gen 4 era, it felt like that. Even the races going back to like 2007, you had this style of racing where, yes, the cars were stable, but they weren't stuck. But at the same time, if they got loose, like we saw with several drivers, Joey Logano probably being the most blatant example of this, but if somebody got into somebody the wrong way, unlike we saw probably 2 years ago with Stenhouse just literally passing people and spinning them out, drivers were able to save it if they got out of shape. And I think that was very important for this race because we've noticed so much in the past with these restrictor plate races. They turn into absolute demolition derbies where it's just like, can you survive to the end? And there's always going to be some element of that in these plate races, and I'm fully aware of that, and I will fully accept that. But this race didn't feel like the entire race was going to be a wreck fest. It didn't feel like there was a big one around the corner every single time cars got side by side. And I think we should talk about that, because the biggest complaint I've heard about plate racing recently has been the long conga lines, the 40-car trains. We only saw that a little bit in this race. For the majority of the race, we at least saw 2 lanes, and more often than not, there were 3. And sometimes there were 4, and that was pretty hairy. I think even sometimes they were 5 wide. But again, that was kind of the 2001 to 2007 package. It raced very similar to that. You even had like the group of 5 or 6 guys that would be leading and a second lane trying to charge up through the field. And the guys, again, like I mentioned earlier, the guys who had fast cars, if Ryan Blaney ended up back there and he got hooked up with Paul Menard or Matt DiBenedetto, like they would just go flying past cars. And it was really exciting racing. It was really exciting for a plate track. The one time we did see the cars get single file, and I know some people are going to get upset with me for beating this dead horse, but the only time they were single file was when they were trying to save fuel to make it to the end of the stage. So I would hazard a guess, if there weren't the mandatory stage cautions, this race probably would have been in a pack the entire time. I think it kind of reinforces this idea that I've had for quite a while, that stages are a band-aid for bad racing. And when you actually have good racing, a lot of times the stages will inhibit the good racing, because with the stage strategy, you had people pitting off sequence, and then all the people who pitted off sequence would get in a line, and then all the people who were still racing in the pack would hear from their spotters, oh, all these guys are in a line, they're going to start catching you. And so they all get in a line, but once everybody cycles through the pit stops, they're all in a pack again and racing 3 and 4 wide. I don't know. Just a thought. I'll put it out there, and you can make of it what you will. There's not to say there weren't some negative things about this race, and I know some people will want me to be completely positive in this video, but I'm not going to be, because I think the finish of the race, while I don't have a complaint about Chase Elliott winning, or maybe it wasn't as exciting as you would have wanted, I think the main problem was the safety aspect of what happened right at the end. Ricky Stenhouse getting into the wall, looking like he might be able to continue, but it was pretty obvious that the splitter had gone underneath the front tires and he wasn't going anywhere. And then you get to the backstretch and another crash happens, because at that point, all the spotters are telling the drivers, well, hey, look, there was a crash, or the drivers saw the crash behind them. They're going to throw the yellow at any minute, get as many positions as you can. Then there was a pretty horrendous accident with Kyle Larson spinning on the backstretch, air getting under the car, nearly going into the catch fence. And we are going to talk about that in just a second, because there's definitely a safety concern there, I think, but I don't think you should knee-jerk NASCAR. But the primary safety concern I had here was, imagine, and again, I don't know how long NASCAR was going to keep the race green. That was another thing that was kind of confusing to me on that particular aspect. Because imagine if Ricky Stenhouse imagine if they had let them race all the way back to the start-finish line, which I think a lot of NASCAR fans wanted them to do, if at all possible. And Stenhouse is sitting there stationary on the inside of the track, and the crash that happened off of 2 happens coming out of the tri-oval, and you have Kyle Larson flying through the air at 170 miles an hour and hits that stationary car of Stenhouse. I think you've got a really serious situation there, and one that would have been entirely preventable. And in fact, I think the Larson crash was entirely preventable, because honestly, I think and I know it would have pissed people off. I probably would have complained about it, to be honest with you. But from a safety standpoint, I think NASCAR would have been right to throw the yellow as soon as that crash it was clear that Stenhouse was not going to be able to get the car into a safe position. I think they should have thrown the yellow. The other thing that everybody's going to want to talk about this crash was the fact that Kyle Larson did get airborne. Nearly got into the catch fence. If the car had taken off about a second earlier, he would have been into the cheese grater, and then who knows what could have happened. Some people have speculated he could have maybe cleared the fence or maybe gone through the fence, The fence on the backstretch definitely doesn't look like it's as strong as the other one, or as the one on the outside wall. If there's something changed, I think that's the first thing that should change. I think they should go with the really high fencing with the little roof fence on top of it. I don't know the proper term, but yeah, that was definitely a frightening moment, especially Jeff Gordon is the guy, if Jeff Gordon's upset by it and worried about it, I think it was a pretty good indication that it was a nasty, nasty crash. In terms of the cars getting airborne, I understand some of the concern from the fan base, and I would understand, even if I don't agree with it, if NASCAR was to make a change to this package. I hope they wouldn't. I don't know where you can put a flap on a stock car that's going to prevent that particular accident. Maybe one that's directly parallel to the side of the car. I don't know. The problem is that airplanes take off at something like 120 or 150 miles an hour. So if you're racing anywhere above there, there's always going to be a chance of cars taking off. I think that's just something that comes with the territory. Again, I think if the thing that I'm most upset about is them not throwing the caution as soon as it was clear that there was a stationary car potentially in harm's way, and then just wrecking them again for no reason. And then I guess we'll talk real quick about Chase Elliott winning. Again, that was another part of this race that felt very much like the old Talladega, the old, when Dale Jr. would win, the most popular guy getting a win at Talladega. And it helps as well that he's only 100 miles away in Dawsonville, Georgia, so he's kind of a local driver as well. It had a lot of those warm, fuzzy feelings that made me, and I think a lot of NASCAR fans, very happy with this race. So from that perspective, it was an absolute slam dunk home run win for NASCAR. But the TV ratings, that was something that I was very interested to see, because I'm pretty sure this was a race that was exactly what NASCAR fans wanted. So did they respond in the TV numbers? No. The ratings were flat from last year, and that was only the overnight ratings. When the finals finally come out, it will probably mean that they will be slightly down, and even if they're slightly up, it's not going to be by very much. Some people have brought up that Alabama was the biggest market. I think Birmingham specifically was the biggest market on the TV audience, and some people are saying, well, why weren't those people at the track? Well, I think Talladega sold about 90,000 tickets for the race, so I think they're doing all right there. And I think any kind of a TV blackout would only hurt the TV ratings. But the main concern I have about all of this is what kept people from tuning in or staying invested in this particular race, despite it being pretty much a return to form for NASCAR. And I think the blame falls not solely, because obviously there's a lot of bad will that's been built up with NASCAR in the past, but based solely on this race, it's Fox. And Fox's coverage was dumpster tier. It was very, very bad. It wasn't carnival barking like I say a lot of the times. It was just bad coverage. I mean, there was examples of going to commercial, especially early in the race, where you'd think maybe they should go side by side here. They didn't. They would miss wrecks. And even when they had the wrecks, or would show the wrecks, a lot of times they would miss key parts, specifically when Matt Tifft was knocked out of the race by a flying oil pan. They mentioned it, brought it up, had full coverage of it. Then they started to show the replay where Tifft actually hit the oil pan, which put him out of the race. And before the oil pan actually impacted the front of the car, they cut away to commercial. That kind of stuff is not great. Not great at all. And I honestly think that Fox has gotten used to covering boring races, and they would miss lead changes doing fluff pieces on David Reagan. It was really weird. They'd have a super tight shot on David Reagan talking about how everybody's got a chance. If you're in the race, you've got a chance. And there's a pass for the lead happening right now. And they wouldn't even talk about the pass for the lead until the cars were 3/4 around the next lap. I mean, it was bafflingly bad coverage. It was really, really bad. And I think if I was in NASCAR management, I'd be like, we're doing our job here, Fox. We actually got it right for once, and you guys screwed the pooch, because you didn't provide the coverage that was worthy of the product we just put on the track. And that was a shame. That was a shame. But let's be positive. It was a good NASCAR race. And I don't get to say that a lot on this channel. So revel in it, enjoy it. I can't wait for Daytona now. I'm thrilled to see what this package looks like at Daytona in July. And then Talladega in the fall. Those will be fun races. The rest of the 35, or not 35, it would be like, what, 32? Not so sure about those. I hope they fix the other ones, because it looks like they've got the super speedway racing right. But let me know down in the comments. If you disagree with me on this one, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I don't know what you want. If you didn't like this and you didn't like the other package, I don't know, what do you want? Take the plates off? I agree with you to a certain extent, but whatever. I think that ship has sailed. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport and NASCAR content. Positive NASCAR video. You got your wish. We'll see you in the next video.